Welcome back. This is week 9, History 322u. And this week we'll be talking about the Asian tigers. That is, the countries around China's periphery that first began to develop quickly after the Vietnam War, really during the Vietnam War, and in the period afterwards. First, we'll talk a bit about the models that were used to examine economic development and to explain it, and then we'll get into some specific cases. I've been having, I'm back in Portland now, and I was having an awful lot of trouble overseas with YouTube. I'm having trouble now. Unfortunately, this is not the first time I've tried to record this lecture, so I'm going to have to keep these to about 5 or 6 minutes in order to avoid wasting a lot more time and having more and more delays in getting these things posted. Okay, let's go on to slide 3. So here you can see the placement of those 4 countries that first really took off in their economic development. They didn't do it all at once, and we'll discuss specific cases about halfway through. But this sort of map became very common in the 1970s to explain to people in the West that there was something going on in Asia. And you can see that the 4 of them, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, are in the area around China's periphery. And that meant that their economic development was of a very intense interest to the United States and Japan because of the continuing Cold War and the belief that China should be kept confined to its borders so it wouldn't spread communism, communist governments around the rest of Asia. So in order to pursue that goal, policymakers felt that it was a very good idea to encourage economic development so that people would not, in poverty, become interested in the pursuit of socialist solutions to their problems. Let's go on to slide 4. And here you can see a quick summary of what import substitution industrialization is versus export-oriented industrialization. Before the mid-1960s, import substitution was considered to be the way to move economies away from their colonial origins. Under colonial economic systems, for example, Malaysia had rubber and tin, and the labor to extract it, produce it, and ship it out to Britain, where it was needed for industrial development. And the British had their own industries, mostly light industries, some heavy industries that produced products that they would then ship to their colonies, which were captive markets. So in the post-colonial era, there were no more apron strings to the colonies from the home countries, so to speak, and in order to substitute those consumer items and other manufactured goods that previously were brought in under this captive economic sort of system, it became necessary to find a way to make those things within the country and therefore stop the drain of capital out of the developing economy. So Malaysia, to go back to Malaysia as an example, Malaysia began to develop its own consumer industries, which they protected by putting high tariffs on imports of things that they could make themselves. And these things they could make themselves, textiles, flashlights, and so on, bicycles, were produced in-country and were sold in-country so that local manufacturing could develop. So that's import substitution, where you're making things that you would ordinarily import and substituting them for the imports. Now this meant building local industries and again putting taxes on imports, but it's a model of limited use for expanding an economy. Export orientation, on the other hand, export-oriented industrialization, is much more useful for rapid industrial development for the reasons that I've listed here that I won't bother to read out loud. It's better that you take a look at them and also go back to the readings and see what is written about these developments in the Owen book. A big bottom line is that multinationals and the governments in their home countries absolutely love export-oriented industrialization because it allows them to have their own manufactures made in countries with lower wage rates and therefore drive their own profits up at the same time as countries where the activities going on also benefit from industrialization and the growth of an educated elite in order to manage those processes. Go on to slide 5, and you can see a little bit more of a examination of the advantages in government policy into large businesses that are obvious. The more you look at this, I think the more it makes sense for those sort of goals. There are objections, of course, to this model and how this model tends to favor elites and policies that benefit elites rather than policies that benefit poorer people. Naturally, the argument can also be made that people who obtain jobs in the factories end up with more money in the bank and end up with more consumer goods that are within their ability to purchase. I'm going to stop recording now since I've had such marvelously unlucky luck with YouTube, and we'll talk about slide 6.